So it's 7:05. We'll go ahead and get started here. Um I'd first like to introduce myself. My name is Nicholas Calderon, and I'm the director of the San Mateo County Parks Department. And I appreciate everyone being here tonight with us, especially with the conditions outside. Really happy to see that I'm recognizing people from throughout the county. So happy to see that everyone still has connectivity and look forward to tonight's forum. I wanted to first kind of just give an outline of what the structure of today's forum is going to be. So this is really an opportunity for us to share what our comprehensive approach is to our integrated pest management program and our vegetation management. And to present on that, we have Evan Cole, who is the San Mateo County Parks Natural Resource Manager, who's going to give a presentation that will be followed by a Q&A. Questions are going to be able to be made in two forms. You can either type one in to the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand when the Q&A segment of the presentation starts after Evan has presented. We will certainly work through answering as many of these questions as we can. What I do ask is, seeing there's about 31 attendees at this point in time, we are going to ask that if you raise your hand, you limit it to one question until everyone has had an opportunity to ask a question. If at that point there is still time left, we're happy to take second questions from individuals, but we do want to make sure that anyone who has a question that they'd like to ask has that opportunity to do so. And so uh, that's essentially our forum today. And before Evan starts, I would like to just say, as an agency, our mission is to protect the county's natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the enjoyment of all, both now and in the future. And part of that and a responsibility we take very serious is the way we manage our natural resources. And so I am confident that through today's presentation, you will walk away with a far deeper appreciation for the thought process we put into this effort and the amount of work we put into stewarding our land. And I couldn't be more appreciative of the work that our natural resource management division does, that our volunteers and our partners do, and I look forward to having Evan share that with you all today. So with that said, Evan, go ahead and take it away. And again, thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks, Nicholas. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Achieving Healthy Ecosystems in San Mateo County Parks. My name is Evan Cole, and I'm the Natural Resource Manager for the county parks. We've heard questions from the public recently about our approaches to vegetation management, and so we're hosting this webinar to improve transparency about our work. The goals of the presentation will be to describe our Integrated Pest Management Program, or IPM, as well as our rationale and process for decision making, and finally to share some examples of projects we implement to improve park habitats. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Parks Director Nicholas Calderon, Assistant Parks Director Hannah Ormshaw, Natural Resource Specialists Samantha Fall and Grace Shaw, as well as our County Arborist Natalie Krug. We'll be able to hear from them during the Q&A session as our panelists following the presentation. As noted, feel free to type your questions into the chat anytime, or you can save them for the end. Again, I think just one per person if we can, at least in the beginning. The presentation, I'm expecting 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how well I match my pace. So let's just get started then. So first, I just wanted to provide some context for why pest management and habitat restoration are important to us as a department. Our mission statement is, through stewardship, San Mateo County Parks preserves our county's natural and cultural treasures and provides safe, accessible parks, recreation, and learning opportunities to enhance the community's quality of life. So natural resource management is one of the main priorities for our department in achieving this mission. My team of subject matter experts utilize an integrated pest management approach in addressing invasive species and preserving and enhancing vital habitat for the benefit of both the park's ecosystems and its visitors. So what is IPM? There are exhaustive definitions that you can find online and on the park's website, but I'll just distill it down here to 4 key points. Science-backed decision-making. So we look to the scientific literature to guide our methods, as well as our own experimental trials to further hone that approach. IPM uses multiple methods. There isn't always a silver bullet solution to a particular problem, pest, or weed, and we often use a combination of methods to achieve success. We prioritize the methods or combination of methods with both the highest effectiveness and with the least net impact on the environment and the public. But let's back up real quick and define what we mean by a pest. In the context of vegetation management, we're mostly talking about non-native invasive plant species. The photo on the right shows an example of invasive pests encroaching into natural areas, in this case, a Bailey acacia stand in mixed evergreen forest at Wonder Lake Park. So we use 3 considerations in determining whether and how to prioritize management of a pest. 1, does it pose a significant threat to ecosystem health or ecological function? 2, does it create or exacerbate wildfire hazard on the landscape? And 3, does it impact visitor use of the parks? A large part of our mission is to responsibly manage the parks for safe recreation by the public. And in this example, in this photo, the first 2 determinants are definitely clear, and the third might be triggered as well if the acacia begins taking over the trail sides. Importantly, only 1 or 2 of these considerations might be needed to warrant action. This figure shows that both over time and as the area of an infestation increases, the likelihood of being able to fully eradicate a species decreases and can eventually get to the point where we can only hope to control the invasive species in certain locations. When eradication is most feasible, this is often before there is even awareness that there is an invasion of the species. Treatment methods can often be categorized as cultural, physical, mechanical, biological, or chemical, and these include methods ranging from mulching to hand pulling, applying herbicide, or grazing goats. Now I'm going to discuss our rationale and decision-making process for identifying and implementing the highest priority vegetation management projects across the county park system. We begin with pest identification based on the series of criteria just discussed. Once we know we have a significant pest on our hands, we weigh management priorities to focus first on projects and locations where we have 1, sensitive native species or high value habitat to be protected or enhanced, and 2, where the scale of infestation relative to that invasion curve still offers a realistic and feasible opportunity for control. This consideration of opportunity costs allows us to get more work done across all of our parks. Finally, once we've zeroed in on our top priorities, we evaluate the best management methods or combination of methods to control the pest or pests. We're often able to evolve methods over time as control is achieved, such as by beginning with an initial treatment of mowing or herbicide, and then switching to long-term treatments with repeated hand pulling. Now let's get into some example IPM projects. This map shows more than 100 points representing invasive management projects from just the last 2 years of work in our parks. We treated 49 different species of pests over these last 2 years. First off, slender false brome. Slender false brome is a great example of an early detection rapid response, or EDRR, species that we've encountered. EDRR involves identifying and addressing pest species as soon as possible after they're introduced to a park, so that we can get the problem under control at the very beginning of that invasion curve. This weed has been found in Hutter, Wonder Lake, and Sam McDonald so far. Cross your fingers. It's fast growing and can quickly crowd out native species on the forest floor. So we pursued an initial treatment on the larger populations using herbicide, and then we switched to hand removal by park staff for the long-term maintenance. This is an ongoing management activity, but it was very helpful that we acted quickly and relatively early for containment of this species. Next up, we have Algerian sea lavender. It's an invasive species found at Coyote Point. This was a priority weed because of the sensitive tidal salt marsh habitat. It's one of the only 2 examples we have in our park system. Management began with chemical treatment, but through monitoring, it was ultimately determined that handwork using volunteer support would be most effective. 898 volunteer hours have been spent removing this weed at Coyote Point in 2022 and 2023. This infestation is actually a good candidate for volunteer management because it's in a very accessible place, and the species is also easy to identify and can be pulled out by hand relatively easy for much of the year. We continue to need volunteer support, but check out the bags of sea lavender in that photo in the back of the truck. Huge day. Oxalis pes capri. Oxalis is a pervasive weed across the Bay Area. You probably have all seen it growing in your yards or roadsides this time of year. It's likely found in all the parks, but management is focused at San Bernardino Mountain, Edgewood, Pillar Point Bluff, and Valimar, where it threatens rare and endangered species. What you're seeing on this slide are two examples of experimental test plots. Above, we tracked the efficacy of flaming oxalis, but as you can see, the weed came right back the following growing season. Below, hand weeding was utilized, but again, to little effect. We've also tried steaming, tarping, burying, and different herbicide formulations over time, and our monitoring showed that the most effective method was ultimately an herbicide formulation, imazamox clearcast. Here's an example of the successful herbicide trial of imazamox at Pillar Point Bluff. The green blanket of oxalis you can see on the left is essentially completely eradicated from the location on the right. While the photos don't span a complete growing season, the oxalis had actually established quite early in the fall of 2021 and was already pervasive in other untreated areas as early as November. So we feel pretty confident about this result as seen in the photo here. This level of control clears the way for us to pursue restoration of the sensitive coastal prairie habitat and offers native species a chance to compete in return. Here's just another quick example. This set of images here shows the results of one of the other herbicide mixes trialed to treat oxalis. This one was Garland 4 Ultra, and this proved ineffective. The location was also photographed in the same two time frames, February 2021 and again in November. But here you might be able to see it's not super clear, but the oxalis is back in full force by November on the right in the open areas between the coyote brush where it had been treated. So not a successful experiment with that particular mix. Next up, I want to talk about eucalyptus. It's an invasive plant species that we are all too familiar with in San Mateo County and California at large. It often transforms native habitats and outcompetes native species, and it also creates significant fire fuel hazards and falling tree hazards for park staff and the public. This photo here, it shows a stand on the side of Guadalupe Canyon Parkway at San Bernardino Mountain before it was treated mechanically using hand saws and chainsaws to cut the trees and sprouts back. So this was a before photo. Here we have on the left, this slide shows the same area of eucalyptus. The left side is just after mechanical treatment, and the right is 2 years later with significant and rapid resprouting. We estimate that at least 4 years of repeated mechanical treatment would be needed to try to achieve full control using only the mechanical methods. But this would cause further disturbance on the landscape and create ongoing hazards to nearby sensitive species. So often our approach shifts to what we call cut stump treatment. This shows a restoration project in Wonderlic County Park where historic grazing lands and orchards had been overrun by eucalyptus. In 2019, the eucalyptus was removed via cut stump treatment, in which the tree is cut with a saw, and then the exposed cambium layer at the top of the stump is immediately painted with a minimum amount of herbicide in order to prevent or reduce resprouting. Here you can see photo points from just before and just after at one location. And now we flash forward to this month at that same location, January 2024. By the second year after initial treatment, which again was in 2019, we were still seeing about 95% control of eucalyptus with only a handful of resprouts requiring follow-up cut stump treatment. The area has now been revegetated as native oak woodland via planting and natural recruitment from the surrounding area. We continue to monitor the site and are only really hand pulling any new eucalyptus sprouts that are coming in from the surrounding area. We have worked closely with the Friends of Edgewood and Creekside Science to facilitate trial experiments of various methods and combinations of methods to restore sensitive grassland habitat at Edgewood County Park. We established specific test plots and used hydromechanical pulverization, or HMP, which is essentially just power washing the ground to destroy the invasive annual grasses. It's a very novel technique. We also tried out mowing, graminicide, which is just grass-targeted herbicide, planting, mulching, watering, and many combinations of these methods to test the most effective solution. These plots are monitored seasonally to observe long-term trends, and we saw a range of success across the plots, but scalability of some methods is still an important consideration when comparing those results. Next up, we have gorse. Gorse is a very challenging weed to control, especially once it establishes in dense walls like it has at San Bernardino Mountain. But we actually had a unique opportunity to restore habitat a few years ago following a fire that reduced a large area of mature gorse. It has been an iterative process so far, as we first began with mechanical mastication and mulching. We followed up with herbicide treatment of any regrowth, followed by more mulching and mechanical treatment. And luckily, we were able to use chips from other projects and trees fallen during the winter storms at County Point, as you can see there on the bottom left, those massive piles of chips, trying to find a home for them. The gorse's extensive seed bank continues to pose a challenge, though. But with this combination of multiple methods over time, we hope to eventually be able to reduce our level of effort while achieving greater and greater control in the area. And eventually, we'd like to reestablish the area at San Bernardino Mountain as coastal scrub and grassland to restore butterfly habitat quality and connectivity at San Bernardino Mountain. Here we have an example of habitat restoration at Junipero Serra County Park, where weeding, planting, and trialing of weed suppression techniques are being used to enhance riparian habitat. We're testing underlying the chips with cardboard versus with planting fabric versus with nothing at all under the chips. And we've been weeding and monitoring, and that will be ongoing still. And we're still evaluating the efficacy of different methods, but exciting progress so far. So those are all the examples we wanted to highlight today for this presentation. These examples showcase the work and methods we use regularly in the parks. Moving forward, for the department's IPM program, we'll be working to increase our transparency for all of the IPM activities that we're conducting. We plan to issue an annual report on all vegetation management activities we do each year. We already do a report on herbicide use, which we submit to the County Agricultural Commissioner's Office. But this annual report we're talking about would cover all IPM activities and methods, as well as progress made towards our restoration goals. We'll be working to publish by the end of spring each calendar year for the work completed the prior calendar year. We will also work to create a more detailed web page about our IPM program and increase the duration and timing of postings and advisories for projects to improve transparency in general. And of course, we'll also continue to experiment with various methods, including methods that are novel or emerging. Testing treatments with grazing, organic herbicide, and tarping in different settings are just a few examples that we're interested in right now. So thank you very much for listening. I'd like to shout out my entire natural resource management team for their important work and help with this presentation. There we are on the left, covered in dirt after getting to the top of Butno Ridge. In the middle, surveying for snowy plovers at Tunitas. And on the right, doing some butterfly surveys at San Bernardino Mountain. So a lot of fun stuff we get to do. We hope this presentation has helped to illustrate the effort and the rationale that goes into our vegetation management and habitat restoration projects. IPM is an important decision-making process which incorporates a variety of treatment methods to achieve our natural resource goals in the parks. We look forward to continuing to improve our transparency on our rationale and our accomplishments. Now we can move right into the Q&A. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Evan. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, and we can go through verbal comments, and then I see there's a few questions in the Q&A as well, so we'll get to those also. Um, I have a few hands raised in the chat, so I'll go in order, and give everyone the opportunity to unmute. So I'll start with Randall. Oh, Randall, you put your hand down. I guess I ended up selecting David. David, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Actually, I don't have a question so much as a compliment. That was a great thing to see. Because each of us tend to be in one park and have our own interests, we don't see the broad picture. And hearing what's going on in all the other parks and what your efforts are is really a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate
Thank
that.
you, David. Then we'll go to Dan Haggerty. Dan, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, coming through fine.
Great. Yeah, I want to thank, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart your efforts for doing what you can to, do the best in control. I do have a few questions. I guess I'll probably come back and ask some more questions one at a time for now. I will say that there's a very complex ecosystem going on when we try to control invasive. I certainly want to get far away from using herbicides. And I specifically, I guess I want to ask what type of you mentioned weed fabric, as one method. And I think that this is the goal. This is the premier concept to move forward with, and that is essentially preventing photosynthesis from happening to the areas, to the species of vegetation that we want to control. And there's many methods. Simple. I like that you mentioned using mulch a lot. Sometimes that's not enough. I want to know, number one, when you do use mulch, how many inches are we talking about? Because 1 inch is not going to do anything. When you're using weed fabric, what type of weed fabric are you using? And are you putting mulch on top of the weed fabric? A significant amount of mulch. And when we take this approach, years ago, people used to, just the go-to was using plastic. That doesn't work, right? That kills the micro organisms under the surface. So we don't want to do that. We want to use some type of a light blocker. Cardboard can work sometimes, although sometimes that can create a bad bacteria
Hey, Dan.
problem. Yes.
Dan, sorry to cut you off. I think we're losing the question in here. So I was wondering if maybe you could just kind of state the question at hand.
The mulch approach, can you be a little more specific? Can you give details on the the weed fabric approach? And the other thing is drainage. A lot of times the certain species thrive when there's bad drainage, a low spot, if you will. No mulch on the top, disturbed soil. So those questions.
Yeah, no, appreciate that, Dan. Evan, were you able to track the question?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just address it briefly, but I'll let some of my other panelists jump in who have been more directly involved lately with some of these techniques. But I think we did bring up a few examples where mulch is definitely utilized, and we do understand that you need often, more than 1 inch, anywhere like around 6 inches or so of mulch might be appropriate, or might be what we end up with. But and even then, you still sometimes find respreading. So as you said, it can't be used alone in a vacuum. And I think we're also demonstrating combination of techniques across a lot of our projects, which is we found to be really important. But for mulching specifically, yes, we do utilize that. We also were using it at the Junipero Serra Park that we used as a case study. And in those cases, yes, as you suggested, we were underlying the mulch with those fabrics. And we weren't just doing that, but we were trying to figure out what's the actual best way, most effective way to suppress these weeds. So we weren't just using planting fabric, we were also doing plots of cardboard and then plots with nothing, and we're monitoring to evaluate success. But I'll see if any of my other panelists have anything to add there.
Yeah, I guess I can add that for one example that comes to mind is the San Bruno Mountain Gorse project that Evan described. The depth of the chips there varied across the landscape, but we had as much as like 12 inches of depth, and I would imagine the like smallest depth was at least 6 inches. So that was a really heavy layer of chip. I will note that some gorse was able to still grow through really thick chip, and then sometimes after a year or two, we had other weed species that were able to grow on top of the chips. Some plants don't need an incredible amount of soil or soil nutrients to thrive. And one thing I want to note about mulching is that for that to be effective, it's something that has to be applied across the landscape. You can't really like avoid sensitive plant species. You can't really retain too much when you use that approach. Grace, did you want to talk at all about some of the planting fabric?
Sure, yeah, I know we're kind of answering a few questions, so I'll be brief, but the planting fabric that we've used thus far has all been like woven polypropylene material, so basically just different forms of plastic. That is really all that is on the market right now that is actually effective at eliminating all weeds at once. If you're using like natural jute materials, those let it plants germinate through the material, which is great if you're trying to hold down native seeds that you just seeded, but not great if you're using them for weed suppression. So yeah, you still have the issues with microplastics with planting material. So sometimes it is not scalable for that reason. It's also can be tricky to install, so it's really very site dependent. So when we have used planting fabric in the past, we tend to cut into the fabric and plant directly after installing that, so that we can have the invasive suppression alongside with the native establishment.
Great, thanks. I hope that answered the question, Dan.
And we'll move on to Melinda. You should be able to unmute.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Yes, so knowing that you guys use herbicides and pesticides, and also I know that you use glyphosate in the county, I'm wondering if you are willing to, I know that it's wonderful, and thank you for doing all this experimentation and all of the work that you do. I'm wondering if you're willing to transition off herbicides and pesticides eventually, when we know, and the reason is because we know there are a lot of places, municipalities that use them only as a last resort and don't use them at all. There's a ranch called Star Ranch out in Orange County, 4,000 acres, chemical free, managed, and it's not expensive. I think they manage, their cost is like $500 to $800 an acre. I'm wondering if you're willing to look at those places, communicate with them, and eventually transition off if it's possible.
Yeah, for that question, I'm going to go ahead and take that. I think Evan did a really good job highlighting how in certain cases, oxalis being a great one, eucalyptus being another one, that we have tried many different approaches, and when in the limited cases that herbicide is the most effective, we have to keep that tool in the toolbox. So I think until such time as we have found other approaches that allow us to meet our stewardship goals, allow us to meet our biodiversity goals, Until those are truly established and backed by science, I can't make that type of commitment. But what I can commit to is that we will continue to do the field studies that Evan talked about during the presentation, that he highlighted at the end of the presentation. We are all about trying new approaches and trying to grow our toolbox so that we can be really the best stewards of land as possible. So that's really the best commitment I can make today, which is that we will continue to field study new approaches so that we can become more robust in our techniques.
Can I say one last thing?
Can you wait until after everyone else has had a chance to
Sure.
ask their questions?
Sure, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Melinda. Appreciate it. Hannah, you're on mute.
Next to Mitzi. Mitzi, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. No worries. I want to keep this real short. I was just wondering how you guys feel about the local synagogue using foreskin and aborted fetuses as fertilizer. I understand that it helps some plants grow and whatnot, but I personally find it disgusting. Is that something you guys are okay with? I mean, do you find it okay to use aborted fetuses and foreskins as fertilizer?
I apologize, Mitzi. I don't believe the question you're asking is relevant to the work that we're presenting on tonight.
So you're
So we
okay
don't
with
have
it?
an answer. This is something we're
You're
completely
okay with
unfamiliar with
babies
as a
having
Parks
the
Department.
You're okay with that. Did you know they actually have the baby, they bring it to a partial erection, and then they snip the skin off, they put their mouth to it, and then now they're using that foreskin as fertilizer.
Mitzi, I'm
Okay.
sorry, we have to
No, Hannah,
end this
we're gonna
question.
go ahead and just remove her. Yeah, I just removed Mitzi. And we can go ahead and just proceed.
Thank you.
And I actually just want to take a moment to apologize to everyone for that. I do apologize that that just happened.
For our next question, we have Judy. Judy, you should be able to unmute.
She may need some help unmuting if you can. Are you able to unmute her directly?
Yeah, Judy, are you able to unmute?
Still muted, Judy, if you aren't speaking.
Judy, can we come back to you? I'll keep your hand raised, but we'll just move on to another speaker, and then I'll come back to you. Next we have Natalie Down. Natalie, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the kind responses to the questions and answers, despite the unplanned interruption back there. That was unfortunate. I would like to ask, so you claim to be using a science-backed integration pest management, and I'm wondering about the science from the EPA saying these pesticide chemicals harm human health as well as 93% of endangered plants and animals. What mitigations are you taking to prevent runoff into the sensitive ocean habitat and wider environment? And is your annual report going to involve any kind of oversight committee? Thank you.
That was a few different questions. So I guess I'll briefly try to address them as I remember them. And then Hannah, you also might be a good person to address some of this. Obviously, I don't have the research in front of me right now that you're referencing, but I am aware of that argument. And it's been my understanding and experience that often these research articles pointing to a lot of these impacts are not, they're mostly from agricultural landscapes, and there's not a lot of research out there to compare to wildlands, which is what we're working in. and the impacts it could have. But we do take all the necessary measures to avoid and limit any kind of runoff or untargeted exposures of the chemicals when we use them. And especially when we're working in the vicinity of aquatic habitats, we, again, it's always a last resort, only when we absolutely need to use the herbicide, but we have specific herbicides approved for these habitats and for use that won't harm these aquatic species. And I think there was another question there, but Hannah, maybe you would like to continue?
Again, I can add it. I know, there, in terms of studies, we, from our end, the expertise we have is in natural resource management. Our area of expertise is in around human health. So we do rely on scientists and other regulatory agencies when determining, potential hazards as well as environmental effects with the use of herbicides. And so, everything that we are doing in terms of our approach to herbicide application is in compliance with all current laws and regulations. And that, the herbicide labels and pest control recommendations that we have for all of the herbicides as well are fully adhered to for all of the work we do, and is all designed and implemented in a way to reduce impacts to the environment, to human health, and park users, as well as the workers who apply these. And so, through our IPM program as well, we're always making an effort to apply the minimum amount of herbicide necessary and at the lowest possible concentrations that can achieve the effective control that we're seeking. Sorry, I seem to keep doing that, muting myself. Next, we have Kim Conte. Kim, you should be able to unmute and ask your question. Kim, are you able to unmute?
There we go. Did that work?
Yeah,
Great.
we can hear you.
Evan, thank you so much for your presentation, and we greatly appreciate your background in protecting pollinators. However, the examples that you shared are missing even one example of following integrated pest management. So we just wanted to, again, understand, someone shared this earlier, is that the Environmental Protection Agency found that glyphosate injures or kills 93% of endangered species, both plants and animals. So since glyphosate is adversely modifying critical habitat for 96% of all species for which critical habitat has been designated, it's really looking like a tool that we want to remove from our toolbox. And working with school districts and other areas, we greatly appreciate integrated pest management. But while it was originally created to minimize risk to human health and the environment, unfortunately, the chemical industry has co-opted IPMs to create marketing tools that maintains the protection of continued pesticide use. So with glyphosate-dependent habitat restoration projects that threaten the very wildlife and habitats that we're working to protect, we're just wondering, why are we not utilizing root wave technology, organic non-selectives, just every other approach than chemicals that we know are really kind of not only turning out to be ecocides, but are failing as tools? So if you look at glyphosate, it's playing out a lot like DDT was. It was marketed to everybody back in the day, not us, it was before our time, but marketed to everyone as safe until enough people got sick. So with glyphosate, the fact that it's creating herbicide resistance and it's created super weeds, and that it has a 22-year half-life in our soil, this is something we can't ignore. So I think what it goes back to, and we've been working with your supervisors, is we need to make sure that there are no cashback incentives for utilizing chemicals. and habitat restoration. And unfortunately, nationally working on this issue, we've found that there are programs created by Bayer and Site One, so chemical distributor, that the more chemicals you purchase actually provides Visa prepaid gift cards. So we just want to remove that gray area. We're not blaming anybody for anything. We just want to protect public funds from ending up being utilized in that manner. Because our whole goal in California in this space is to protect critical habitats and to protect our native species. But if we're using an ecocide that per the EPA enters and kills 93% of the endangered species, plants and animals, like we just need to kind of revisit our tools. And we have to look at our toolbox and understand from a liability standpoint to an efficacy standpoint that this tool should be removed. So we're really interested to hear your opinion on the EPA's position on endangered species and how it threatens endangered habitats. That's all.
Sorry, Kim, just to follow up on your question, I guess, the question overall is generally, what is the position on the use of Roundup?
But also just, integrated pest management, because I think it is needed. I believe that, IPMs do safeguard everything from habitat restorations to school district management of school sites. But the problem is that we can't have policies taken online where we don't have people actually following the policy. So if we're not utilizing organic controls, and if you guys share that they're not working, I get that, but please give us examples of what organic non-selectives are not effective, because we know in City of Irvine, open space, New York City is organically maintained, all 5 boroughs. So if they're achieving control, then, let's just at least look into those areas.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. So, I think this goes back to what Nicholas was saying before for a previous answer, and that, integrated pest management, as we utilize it and as we define it as a department, is focused on, utilizing a variety of tools, experimentation with different methodologies, and using the methods that are the most effective for the management goals we have and that we want to achieve. And so that isn't about, the use of one specific method over another, or anything associated with incentivizing the use of any particular method. For our department and for our approach to integrated pest management, it is very much about gaining the best understanding of the tools used to meet our management goals, and having the ability to make the most informed decisions about the best way to use those methods.
But aren't you concerned about your management goals impacting the exact communities you're being tasked to protect?
So I definitely think Hannah has addressed that, Kim. Certainly happy to, if you have a second question, if you wouldn't mind putting your hand down and then asking again that question after other people have had a chance to answer. I do see there's a number of people who are looking to ask their first question. So I do appreciate that. But again, certainly happy to answer additional questions after others have had a chance to ask their first.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Kim.
And next we have Rex. Rex, you should be able to unmute.
Alrighty, good evening, guys. Yeah, my name is. I've been doing permaculture on 14 acres for about, let's see, I think it's 8 years and 8 months now. So I hope that you guys could check out the Ruth Stout method. That's one that I found that really worked well for me. Ruth Stout, she was a retired school teacher, and as she got older, the tilling of the land, of the soil was a little bit hard for her. So what she decided to do was just she would pile up about 8 inches of hay in her gardening area. Now she gardened about 1 acre, so it was, it wasn't like it was a small garden. So and that's what I do. I have a scythe. I scythe. I keep about an acre and a half for just to let the grass grow. I scythe it down, and then I take and I put that throughout um, the growing area, let's say. And the reason why I like that as more than mulch is because you get the moisture retention, you get weed suppression, but then it also breaks down into fertilizer for the soil. So it's a complete system. And that's the thing, we live in an ecosystem. Most people don't realize that dandelions will only show up in a place that has tight soil. And the dandelion, I mean, you all know, I would imagine that dandelions have a very long tap root, and so they basically go through and they aerate the soil for you. So if you don't have to go out there and just start dousing them all with chemicals. You let nature take its course, and like if you have aphids attacking your plants, uh, nematode that supplies that's a food source for like predatory nematodes. Then the nematodes will come in and they'll eat them. So glyphosate was created by Monsanto. That's an evil corporation. Levi Monsanto, definitely worth an early life check on Wikipedia. But what I would like to say is, all organic material is not created equal. So as we're looking for different ways to, compost and to mulch and things like that, some things do need to be purified. So what I would like to propose, or the question that I would like to ask is it feasible that we take that throughout?
Sorry, we're gonna have to remove your permission to talk.
Thanks. Yeah, we're able to remove it.
Again, I do want to apologize. This is just disgusting, and absolutely not reflective of the type of forum or the positions of the organization. I just want to apologize to everyone.
Next we have
Hey, am I coming through all right?
yes.
Can hear you.
Okay, I just had a few suggestions. We keep using all of these new poisons and chemicals, and I think we need to take it back a few decades. Back in the early 40s, we had the perfect thing, and we used it all the time to get rid of all the pests.
Apologies. Um, next we have Randall Tarley. Hi, Randall, you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Good evening. Is my mic working?
Yes, it is.
All right. I'm a farmer right now. I work on 78 acres, about half of which is a hothouse. The other half is a field, um, so I'm farming out there. And one thing I'm against personally is monoculture because it increases the use of pesticides altogether. Because if I have, let's say I've got melons growing, I rotate my crops every year. But if I have melons growing out in my field and I have row after row after row after row of melons, that is something that is not going to mitigate pest management. That's going to increase pest risks. That's going to increase disease risks. So something that I've noticed right here in North America altogether is that we do a lot of monocultures, and that makes it very, very difficult to do integrated pest management. I personally prefer to use bioorganisms myself. If I've got aphids, I'm buying ladybugs. And especially for my hothouse, when I get thrip, I'm buying so many different kinds of bioorganisms to try and mitigate the fact that they're breeding and they're affecting my crop, they're affecting my fruit. And it's absolutely ridiculous because I try and farm organically. I do the best I can to farm organically. I don't spray. I don't spray glyphosate, and I'm
Randall,
completely.
can I ask you to maybe ask your question?
Yeah, why in North America are we just as a natural practice spraying Roundup or glyphosate on all of our grain crops in order to increase the seed yields and increase the ripening process in order to make all of our fields turn ripe and brown at the same time?
So I'm actually going to ask everyone, I apologize. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to ask everyone if going forward, we're going to ask that all questions be typed into the Q&A segment. And then what we're going to do is we're going to read them off of that, and certainly happy to answer questions and allow, and, you know, I certainly know some people may have multiple questions, so that might be a little bit easier. But I do apologize. I see a number of individuals with their hands up. We're going to ask that you move it to the Q&A, the typed in section, and we'll go ahead and address those one at a time. And again, I apologize for the way tonight has gone. It is absolutely not what we had wanted. It's unfortunate and disgusting people's behavior, and I apologize for that. And I just think it will be best if we only utilize the chat, so we will no longer be allowing people to unmute themselves. And I do apologize, but I think this is the best route forward.
Thank you, Nicholas. So looking at the top, we have a question from Patty Mail. How do you define and use broadcast spraying of herbicides and pesticides? Evan or Sam or Grace, would you like to share?
Sure, I can start on that question. Our definition of broadcast spraying is a practice that would occur over a larger landscape and would not necessarily be applied to one target species, but kind of to kind of anything that is present in the area. So yeah, I mean, to kind of like move forward from that, our treatments are applied to a target pest species. You always have a specific plant in mind, and we apply the herbicide directly to the foliage of our target species, or to the cut stump or potentially the basal bark of the target species in question. Yeah, does anyone have anything they want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say like Sam mentioned, broadcast spraying isn't a practice that we utilize. With our approach, it is a targeted application for the species we are intending to focus on for control. So the definition for broadcast spraying is not something that we utilize as an application method.
I would also like to just maybe provide a little bit of clarity. So the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors actually adopted a resolution that prohibits broadcast spraying. So we don't broadcast spray, nor are we even allowed to pursuant to board resolution. And the San Mateo County Parks Department fully complies with the adopted resolution, as well as the intent of what the board was trying to accomplish when they adopted that.
Next, we have a question from Chuck and Loretta. What are organic herbicides?
Sam, do you have a good definition for us on ready?
I don't have a particularly polished definition, but for an herbicide to be organic, it would need to be certified as organic by And this is maybe showing my ignorance of which certifying board does the organic certification, but they would have to meet those requirements. So I can quickly Google to clarify exactly what is needed for something to be organic, unless someone else has that at hand.
Well, and most simply, it's naturally derived ingredients, so it's not synthetic chemical formulations, which many normal pesticides utilize. So that's as I mentioned in the presentation, that's definitely a tool that we're interested in exploring and trying out. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not. We haven't really used them very much so far. At least I haven't myself or my team, and so I'm not as familiar with them as I would like to be. But as I said, we'll be trialing that out, and we'll be able to hopefully include reports on our success or whatever the outcomes are in annual reports in forthcoming years.
Just want to add a tiny bit about some of the considerations to do with organic herbicides. I think, like Evan, I'm excited to see about the potential of those. Some notes are that sometimes organic herbicides can be more acutely toxic than some of the other options. And with acute toxicity, that refers to kind of like the immediate health impacts to the people who would be applying herbicide or pesticide. One other thing to know about a lot of organics is that they are non-selective. And so and often they are contact. So that means that their mode of action, they have to contact the plant and then they sometimes like burn the plant or cause it to wilt or something like that. So that often kills the foliage of plants, but that may not kill a more kind of well-developed or root system or something like a tuber or a bulb, which are often structures we have to deal with our invasive species. But yeah, definitely interested to learn more.
And so I mean, those are great clarifications, Sam. Thank you. And I think that speaks again to the fact that we're still, there's still no evidence of a silver bullet solution. That's why we've been incorporating different methods and combining methods to try to find the most effective solution. And this is these are always very case by case situations, depending on the target weed, the context, like the landscape context of where the species are present, where it's located in the parks, which park it's located in. So there's a lot of considerations that go into it. And though we haven't trialed organic pesticide, I think we'll bring it in as a tool in our toolbox, but I don't expect that will also become a silver bullet solution given the limitations it has that Sam just described.
Thanks, Evan. Next, we have a question from Greg Diegas. How does the use of herbicides or pesticides in San Mateo County compare with other Bay Area counties like Santa Clara? Has an analysis been done based on type of terrain, method of treatment, cost, etc.? So I can field that one if you'd like.
I'm sorry, cut out. I didn't hear the question, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the variation in use again is often dependent on how different agencies may have different IPM goals and objectives, or perhaps have different target species that they're focusing on and may use different methods for control. And like Evan said, there's usually no one size fits all solution for integrated pest management. But we feel that through the examples we've shared tonight, we are showing that the use of herbicide isn't the only tool that we're utilizing for weed management, and that as part of our decision-making process, we're doing these various different trials to determine efficacy, and then ultimately deciding on what the best tool is available to meet the management objectives. And so, I can't speak specifically to all other agencies, but anticipate there are just various different approaches to IPM, what the target species are that are being addressed, and the different methods available for use for those species. Next, we have a question from Amy. Wow, that's a lot of treatment types. Thank you so much for the information. I'll be interested to learn more about what you're seeing as successful treatment for different weeds. Are you also tracking native plant regeneration in those areas?
Yes, I mean, I didn't get so much into a lot of our monitoring methods because I wanted to be able to focus on the vegetation management treatments. But that's certainly part of what we do, depending on the park and the sensitive resources that might be in the surrounding area, or what we're trying to actually restore. Like what's the, as we mentioned, ecosystem health and ecological function are one of the kind of driving criteria for whether we want to prioritize management of a particular weed in a particular area. And so these areas that we're doing a lot of this work, it's often driven by the presence of habitat or species that we're trying to preserve or enhance.
Thanks, Evan. And next I'm going to go to Kellex. Could you tell us more about what best management practices you use to prevent drift of herbicides via air and waterways?
Sorry, that was metrics we used to measure.
Can you tell us more about best management practices used to prevent drift of herbicides via air or waterways?
Yeah, I could get it started off, but I think Sam, if you don't mind, I would like to call on you. Sam is one of our 2 qualified applicator license holders on my natural resources staff. So she is trained and completes continuing education credits on the pesticides that we use, and she understands a lot of the requirements in the actual application of the pesticides on the day, and best management practices depending on sensitive resources that might be in proximity. So Sam, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I guess the first note is that we have a very specific window of conditions under which we or any of our contractors apply herbicides. So, for example, to avoid drift on wind, we only apply herbicides when winds are between 2 and 7 miles per hour. So that they are not being caught by the wind and taken where we don't want them to be. And then to avoid runoff in water, we avoid herbicide application when there's a forecast of rain within 24 hours. Another way that we avoid non-target herbicide application or just herbicide going off target is to avoid applying herbicide when the temperature is above 80 degrees, as some materials can begin to volatilize at higher temperatures. So we want to avoid that as well. Let's see.
I'll add real quick too, Sam, just to broaden the conversation to all of our vegetation management methods. When you do these removals, especially of a lot of these denser weeds that take over areas in proximity to waterways, often we have a lot of follow-up and of course monitoring to limit. It's not just a concern about chemicals entering the waterway, but sediment and other kinds of debris that can get in and increase turbidity and harm the ecological health of the waterway. So we pursue stabilizing measures for the slopes near waterways when necessary. Revegetation with native plants is always a priority to try to increase filtration of runoff and reduce erosion in those areas. So there's a lot of kind of follow-up actions that we do to mitigate impacts of the vegetation management in general to waterways.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. A few other things that came to mind while Evan was talking have to do with buffering. So we often have a buffer of between 15 to 40 feet of between herbicide application and waterways. There are also some herbicides that have been approved by the EPA and registered in California for use in aquatic systems. So those are ones that we may be able to use somewhat closer to waterways or wetlands. I think that's most of what I had. Something else, but it has left. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Obviously, it's, there's a lot of extensive measures we take before, during, and after any kind of vegetation management, and especially with herbicide, to avoid any kinds of impacts or degradation to waterways.
Sorry, Evan, it came back to me. The thing that came to mind had to do, I guess, with like non-target drift. Sometimes when we have invasive species growing within host plants at San Bruno Mountain, host plants for rare and endangered butterflies, we'll have the contractor use a shield, so a plastic shield or a cardboard shield around the invasive species, or I guess really shielding the host plant so that the herbicide does not contact the species that we are trying to protect. That's it now. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, and so of course, some of these measures are applicable to all herbicide treatments, not just in proximity to waterways. And there's certain ones that we implement specifically when there's sensitive habitats like a waterway nearby. Hannah, next question. You're on mute.
Hey, Hannah, before that, I've been reading some of the questions and comments in the chat. I want to be abundantly clear that I without any uncertainty denounce what was stated today. These comments were disgusting, and there's no place for that in our society, and there's absolutely no place for that anywhere. So I want to be really clear, and I don't want anyone to walk away today with the idea that I or this department or our organization feels any other way. It's disgusting. It's unacceptable. With that said, we're going to continue to answer these questions. I don't think moving over to the chat has somehow reduced public participation. I actually think we're having a phenomenal conversation right now, and we're able to answer the questions. People are still able to ask the questions that they have. We're still able to share information. We look forward to continuing to do that. But I've been reading some of these, and I just want to be abundantly clear where we stand on this issue. So we will continue. Certainly happy to continue to answer questions.
I'll also add, Nicholas, if anybody is feeling unsettled by the comments and you would like to have more of a one-on-one conversation with us, you can also email us your questions separately if you want to hop off the webinar.
Yeah, Grace, thank you for that. Evan, could you put your email back up on the screen, the slide with your email back up?
Yes.
And also, I apologize, my video is off. The power in my office is going in and out with these storms right now.
There's my email address. Thank you, Grace, for that. Yes, of course, if anyone wants to leave or needs to leave, you're more than welcome to reach out to me individually, or if you're willing to, if you're interested in continuing this chat, then you're still welcome to reach out if you feel like you have any lingering questions still after this presentation. But yeah, I think we'll continue on if there's more questions relevant to the presentation.
Thanks, Evan. So I'm going to go down to Doug Johnson. What science-based resources, i.e. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, University of California, other Bay Area stewardship agencies, do you base your IPM approach on? Thanks.
I can take this one.
I find that question. Go for it, Sam.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I guess some kind of foundational resources include the Weeds of California and Other Western States, which is a UC Agricultural Natural Resources UCNR publication that compiles lots of experience, like decades of experience, and provides kind of guidance to land managers about what sort of mechanical, manual, chemical, biological options may be available for various species. We also heavily refer to the California Invasive Plant Council's resources, including listings and prioritization of which species kind of are having which invasive species are having kind of the heaviest impact to habitat and ecosystem health and function. There's also lots of important and helpful information on different management techniques that could be used, applicable, as well as information on how to identify various species. Other resources, so I think there was mention of U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does participate in the registration process with the EPA, providing comment and guidance on the kind of environmental impacts of the herbicides that are being proposed for registration. We also, I guess this might be a good time to talk about the Prescribe database. Prescribe stands for Pesticide Regulations Endangered Species Custom Real-Time Internet Bulletin Engine, which is a huge mouthful, but this is basically a kind of a program put together by California Department of Pesticide Regulation, using data from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's California Native Diversity Data, Natural Diversity Database, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife spatial data on threatened and endangered species, and NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service data on threatened and endangered species, so that we know kind of on the ground, if we're in an area, which endangered species would be present and what sort of protection measures need to be put into place to avoid impacts to those species. We also participate, like Grace and I and Evan and Hannah participate in symposiums. So Grace and I have attended the Cal IPSI symposium, showcasing different weed management techniques and research for the past couple of years. And we also kind of are able to collaborate with other parks departments, nonprofit groups, and others at regional meetings, and in more informal collaboration options. So we do have those opportunities to hear from other people what methods are using, what's been effective.
Thank you, Sam. Next, I'm going to go down to Matt Swagler, just to look for people who haven't had a chance to have a question answered yet. Matt says, I want to commend you on a well thought out program. I understand the challenge of managing difficult weeds in vast landscapes. The general public might not recognize how much study and consideration goes into land management. Catching weeds before they have a chance to establish is a major victory. Can you share more examples of early detection that you have worked on in the last few years?
Well, I could start off just by saying that this is something we've really been interested in increasing our capacity to do in recent years. Our natural resource management program is very young still, especially relative to some of the larger agencies. I think it's only been like 8 or 9 years since we've even had a natural resource manager at county parks. And so, we've really been stepping up our game in the past few years, and we've been able to increase the amount of projects we get done and the amount of staff, and especially critically seasonal staff that are able to do a lot of this field work for us. And so, I worked several years ago from Marin County Parks, and I was, mostly on the wildlife side of things, but we did have a team of EDRR specific field staff, and that's something that I've always been interested in implementing in the San Mateo County Park system. And so we're looking into how we can make that work. And there's obviously challenges with having staff properly trained and qualified to identify these species, but also able to perform that kind of intense field work that is necessitated for EDRR to really be effective. With that said, there are definitely other examples. We're very involved with Cal IPC and other networks, Native Plant Society, California Native Plant Society, and so we're tuned into a lot of local and proximate new observations of various species that are not yet established in the county. And so we are constantly on the lookout and treating a lot of invasive species as they come. But Sam or Grace or even Hannah, I'm not sure if you have any kind of more recent examples of species that we've identified early on.
Maybe not as a specific species, but I think in general, you know, with our eyes on the ground, we're always making an effort to identify infestations when they are early and small, and it's feasible to reach a level of eradication, even if it is a more commonly found weed species. So that's another approach to early detection, rapid response, even if it's not a novel species, that you know, we're still working hard to find infestations while they're still small and manage them quickly so that they don't become a larger problem.
Yeah, and the public is a really great resource to us as well in identifying these early detection species. There's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot on this call right now, a lot of really talented amateur and professional naturalists and biologists that are able to alert us to whenever they see something that could potentially be an EDRR or other kind of invasive problem.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we also do work with other departments and across agencies to keep our eyes out for, you know, Calypsy limited or moderate rated weeds. For example, County Ag actually just reached out to us a couple months ago, and they had found some Mexican pokeweed off of our property, but adjacent to San Bruno Mountain. So that was an example that we actually went out, boots to the ground, and scoped our property to make sure that it hadn't come onto county park land. And that's one of the, you know, many examples of when we're alerted from partner agencies, or we can alert other partner agencies of infestations that may be spreading. And I think Sam also just found a individual pokeweed in Quarry Park that she was able to remove.
Yeah, I was going to note that after hearing about Mexican pokeweed during our weed management area, so our San Mateo weed management area meetings, and having some slides on identification, I did identify some in Murata East and was able to dig those out of the ground and also mark where they are so that we can come back and look at that site over years and make sure it's not coming back. I think there have also been some other weed species, not necessarily those with a super high potential to be invasive, but that we've noticed in our early in their infestation. You know, last year when we had a parkade at San Bruno Mountain, we had him take out a red valerian patch that was becoming quite vigorous in the footprint of a recent wildfire. We've also been working on removing harlequin flower, which is a beautiful bulb that grows along the ridge line of San Bruno Mountain. So just trying to get that out before it becomes really heavily established. Detrichia, so stinkwort, is, you know, really pervasive throughout the South Bay area and in some of our southern parks, but we don't currently have an incredibly huge infestation, so we're really trying to put a lot of effort into getting the infestation we do have at Hutter and at Wonder Lake under control so that we can, yeah, hopefully keep that from getting a huge foothold in our park system. Yeah, and then I think Hannah already mentioned we try to opportunistically remove things and also you know, make sure we're keeping an eye out when we're in the field for other projects, remove those early stage infestations. So that can look like pulling out Monterey pine seedlings when we're walking around Pillar Point Bluff in the coastal prairie areas, or at San Pedro Valley, cutting down Monterey cypress and pine saplings. Yeah, just in general, trying to pull out those small infestations before they get bigger.
Thank you, Sam. So it looks like in the questions, there's one other commenter who has, you know, essentially on the first question. But, you know, after that, I do want to note that, you know, I do see a number of comments just regarding the topic of Roundup specifically. And I do want to go back to the initial comment that Nicholas made at the beginning of the presentation, that it's not our intent with this forum tonight to have you know, a lengthy debate about Roundup or herbicides specifically, but you know, that our intent tonight is to just be able to share more information about our approaches to vegetation management and integrated pest management. So you know, that's ultimately our goal for what we want to be able to really discuss in detail tonight. But I will turn to Laurel Frischman's question. And she's asking if we could provide more information about herbicides that do not harm aquatics. So I assume that's just maybe some more specifics about which formulations are considered aquatic safe.
Yes, Sam, do you think you would be able to address this question? I'm not as familiar with the exact chemical formulations and you know, like the safety implications of them, but essentially what I meant by that statement earlier in the presentation, I think is what the commenter is referencing, is that there are certain pesticides that are safer to use in proximity to aquatic habitats and species, and that and there are, you know, certain injunctions and requirements that we follow when there's sensitive aquatic species around, like California red-legged frog. And Sam, if you would be able to expand upon that. And
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are just different formulations of active ingredients that have been registered for use in aquatic systems. So I think I would have to do more research to discuss more in depth, like the mode of action and some of the chemistry behind how that all works. But yeah, I guess we should also specify that we don't actually apply any herbicides directly to water within our system. That's not something we do. We do our applications are to dry vegetation. So for example, at Coyote Point, when we did some herbicide application to the Limonium before moving into a fully manual approach, that was specially timed with the tides so that the herbicide would be applied when the plants were exposed and dry, and also that so that there would be enough time after the application for the plants to dry, so that yeah, like the wet herbicide. I guess the reason we want the sprays to dry is so that the herbicide can be absorbed into the plant and act systemically in the plant and kill the plant, versus being kind of easily washed away when it's still in its wet form. So yeah, I think we'll have to follow up with some more background on aquatic rated.
yeah, thanks, Sam. Obviously, you know, these products are complicated, and we'd be happy to elaborate upon, you know, which chemicals we use and where, and what are some of the aquatic species of concern. So I'd encourage that commenter to reach out directly, and we'd be happy to follow up with more information. But I would like to also just add, Sam hinted to this in the beginning of her comment, just that the main, it's not just that we don't apply directly to waters, but you know, our first choice is always to avoid applying herbicide, you know, even in proximity to these habitats. It's not something that we generally do, and we're always trying to make sure that we're minimizing any potential for impact, not just impacts. Nicholas, did you have something to say? I noticed you came back on video.
No, I was taking a look at the comments and questions. I think that's, pretty much, I think we've addressed everything. And so I wanted just to take a minute to thank everyone who's still on for your participation tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. I can't apologize enough for some of the activity that occurred tonight. And can't express my disgust enough. And so I do just want to state that again. I am sorry. But with that said, I do want to thank Evan, and I do want to thank the Natural Resource Management team for being here to share this information. I think this is such a critically important aspect of what we do as a department and why we exist. As I look at the attendance list as well, I see so many names of people who dedicate time and effort to this system to help make it what it is, and so I want to thank you for that. And so, with that, I would like to say good night, and I appreciate everyone's participation, and I appreciate the efforts of my team tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.